Okay, so my name is Dr. Kentress Davison, and I want to welcome my guests to Dr. Hood's Helping Others Overcome Determinants Open Discussion. And our topic for today is the informed consent process. And now I'm going to allow my two individuals or my two guests to introduce themselves. Hold on, go to the next page. So we introduction of the host, then we're going to have the introduction of the group, then we're going to go over the concepts of the informed consent process, and then we're going to go over some takeaways. So I am currently a senior clinical research associate with the CRO company. I have been a CRA for almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years in October, and I was a study coordinator at an academia in Alabama for nearly 10 years. My primary studies as a study coordinator was a diabetes and endocrinology. And once I transitioned to the CRA role, the first year and a half, it was pulmonary disorders, COPD, and asthma. And then when I joined, well, I should say first 10 months. And then when I joined the company I am with now, it transitioned into infectious disease. So I've been working on a lot of vaccine studies. I started Dr. Hood last February on paper, but was active started in March. And I noticed as a CRA that there were some deficits in training levels, documentations, and there was also what seems to be an apprehension for individuals to get into clinical research. I myself, in 2008, got my undergrad in biology, and it took me until November of 2011 to even become a clinical research coordinator, and that was after having 7 years of patient care experience. And then I would say the last 3 years of me being a study coordinator, I tried off and on for a CRA role, and I ended up getting it during the I would say a post year one of COVID, when CRO companies were kind of starting back up, hiring back up after there was layoffs when COVID hit. So I want to help people transition into clinical research roles, or if they just need some education on the fundamentals of clinical research. That is what this video serves as. Okay, so now we can have Miss Sharon can introduce herself, and then is it Swawaka? We
You can say it like Swatvika.
Swatwika. Okay,
Yeah. You can
and then
call
you
like
can.
Swati, so it's easy for you.
Okay, okay, Miss Sharon, you can go ahead.
Okay, my name is Sharon Tan. Hey, Kentress, I think we know each other. I came to CRE and replace you when you left.
You were my but I didn't want. I said, but I don't want to. I don't want to say that that's her and that's not her. But I thought you were my replacement. I
Yeah, yeah.
thought you was
So,
my replacement.
so
I
that's
said,
why
I
when you,
think. I said, I think that's who took over when I left.
yes, so that's why when you invited me, I said, "Oh, I want to join because I think I met my old friend now." Yeah.
I'm so happy I was right, but I was like, but I'm gonna seem a little weird if I say you who replaced me in there because your hair is longer now, isn't it?
No, actually, I'm just you, the old picture.
Oh, okay. See,
Yeah.
that's what threw me. I was like, well, no, I think her hair was shorter. Her hair was shorter than that, so that's probably not her. But okay, yeah. So we know each other, so I'm
Yes.
happy.
I'm
Okay,
work at UAB as a clinic trial coordinator. So yes, I'm in the academic research for past 10 years now.
okay.
Yeah, that's it.
And your background was
My background, I'm a foreign trained, I'm a Chinese trained OBGYN.
yep.
Actually, I practice
Yep.
as
I
a
remember.
physician
I said she's a
before I
doctor.
come to here. Yes, yes, yes.
She's an OBGYN. Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so we are going to. So this is just a little fun icebreaker. We've already stated our names. She you're in Alabama with me and our current roles. So you all just let me know your favorite condiments. Mine is probably a Thai with mayo and ranch dressing. I can't decide which one I prefer the most.
Uh, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what is my favorite. I want to pass this question because we don't I eat differently like you guys. So
Like, but you
Yeah,
have maybe like yum yum sauce or duck sauce and stuff like that. So even if it's not one of the ones that's on the picture, you can say like what spice or sauce you like to use.
I like very spicy sauce, which we made it by ourselves. There's none of this on your picture, but I like spicy sauce. Yeah.
Okay.
yeah,
And
Mm.
what about you?
even yeah. Hi, I'm a Swatvika. You can call me Swati. So I usually don't eat any of this condiment. Yeah, I usually prefer homemade. My mom makes. So we are my parents are like farmers. We are like agriculture family. So we usually cultivate all the things at our fields. So she makes them like she'll send whatever spices we'll get it to USA. So I usually use that spices to make my food.
Okay.
So
And
I don't prefer.
tell us about your current role.
Say it again.
Tell us about your current role. So are you
Okay.
a student now? Or are you working?
Okay. Hi. I'm Swadvika Chukagari. I'm a graduate student in UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And I came from pharmacy background where I finished my undergrad in doctor of pharmacy, PharmD. And during that time, since my third year itself, I started working as clinical research trainee.
The entire process starts with the informed consent. So that's why we're going to start by talking
Yes,
about
yes,
that.
yes.
Okay, so the informed consent. So, a general definition is the key aspects of the informed consent process is thoroughly explaining the purpose of the procedures, its potential benefits, and associated risk. This ensures that the patient fully understands what they are consenting to. So this is so important. And so the FDA has the aspect of it, and good clinical practice has the aspect of it. And there are components that must be within that informed consent form in order to be approved from the Institutional Review Board, or what we call the IRB, before the participants can even review it. So when you hear the informed consent, um, these are just some general aspects, again, that elements that need to be in part of the informed consent is the section 21 CRF part 50 of the FDA regulations outlines what those aspects need to be. So I'll just let that stay here for about 10 seconds so our reviewers can have an opportunity to read it, and then they can always pause. But we're not going to go into each one of them, but I just wanted to point out that there is some outline. So we know the patient has to be competent. It needs to be an adult patient or legal representative. We know adolescents need to have a legal representative or a parent sign, depending on what the type of clinical trial. It might need to be two parents, and it might need to the minor themselves sign what's called an assent. Um, but all that documentation has to be kept with the clinical trial. Anytime ICF needs to be updated in association with the amendment of a protocol or a safety um, issue, then all those participants within that clinical trial will need to be reconsented if advised by the IRB. Okay. So I'm asking you all, what words come to mind when thinking about providing consent for clinical research? What do you think about when you hear that you need to get consent from a participant? What concepts or words do you think about?
Communication.
Okay, so how many patients you need to enroll in a clinical trial?
No, communication. How
Oh,
you
communication. I thought you
commu-
said how many patients. Okay,
yeah.
yes, communication. So now that you mentioned communication, one of those regulatory requirements is that the informed consent has to be in a language or the language in which the person speaks, or an interpreter has to be present. So it's uh, to help facilitate it, but it has to be in the language that the participant speaks. So if you have a Spanish population or a Chinese population, that informed consent form needs to be in their language that they speak. Now, of course, if English is their first language, then they can get the English version. What do you think about um Swaka?
Yeah. I think about it's a trust and understanding.
Trust?
Yeah.
Yes, that is
So
so
the
important.
participant and the research team, they should both have the built in the trust what the process is going on, and the volunteer is like the participant who is participating in the clinical research should
Mhm.
participate willingly. No pressure, or like no one should like make him forced to join in the process.
Yes, and that's what that was one of the main concepts that I was looking for.
Yes.
Willingness to participate. And there should be no fear
Yes.
if you don't participate that it will affect your standard of care practice, because we know a lot of individuals that are principal investigators, they might also have a standard of care practice and they pull their participants from their standard of care population. But if a patient decides not to participate in their clinical trial, there should be no fear of their standard of care changing because they didn't participate.
Yes. Yes.
So that's one of the key things that I wanted to point out. Also, we know that the informed consent should be provided before any assessments are completed. So when I was a recruiter, because when I first started as a coordinator, my primary role was to recruit the participants. So I would email them the consent form and encourage them to discuss with their primary care physician or and their family. And I told them, you don't have to worry about bringing that copy that I sent you via email. I will print a new copy if you decide to be screened for the study. But that kind of lets them know that they don't have to rush into a decision. They don't have to make the decision themselves. Here's if they trust their medical provider, then they have somebody with medical expertise to can kind of give them some information on whether or not this clinical trial will be beneficial to them. And we want to make sure who's ever conducting the informed consent process that they document that process. So we want to make sure that they document that they gave the participant enough time to read over it. They provided a question and answering session, so the participant can ask any questions he or she may have. That they were not coerced in any way. They were not threatened in any way to participate. And then also I think a misconception about signing an informed consent form as it relates to a clinical trial. I think some individuals think it's a contract. So once I sign it, I have to stay in this clinical trial. So I think it is very important for the person who is conducting the informed consent process, lets that individual know, hey, if you decide tomorrow you no longer want to participate, you have that right. Now, I know the FDA has encouraged sponsors to continue get adverse event information, concomitant change information from these individuals if they no longer want to receive the study treatment or come in for the visits, but that has to be discussed when that patient initially say, hey, I want to withdraw consent. Then you'll say, well, do you mind consenting to safety calls? And but that has to be documented, and if they said no, then that's it. You contact the patient no further. And you complete no more assessments. So good conversation of what words come to mind when providing clinical research. And we
Yes,
kind of touched on
basically clear understanding of what's the study is going on, everything with the participant and the research team.
exactly, and you gauge whether or not they understand during that questioning and answering session, because you don't just have to the participant doesn't have to just be the person providing questions. I feel that the person providing the consenting process should also ask a few questions just to make sure the participant understands. Excuse me. So we talked about one thing, what word, or actually kind of two, but what words or circumstances should not happen when performing the consent process. So we talked about no coercion, and we talked about not performing assessments prior to the informed consent process. Could either you think about another situation that should not happen during the informed consent process?
Uh, I told you earlier, like there is no pressure when they wanna do the study, like when they wanna be in the part of the study. So I think forcing or pressurizing the participant should not be there.
Okay. What about let's see,
And
okay,
and also lack of understanding.
what about when a person cannot read the informed consent? What typically must take place?
Hmm.
What do you have to have if a person cannot read?
It's completely misleading the information, so or like it's incomplete disclosure, like if they don't read it, if they don't get it clearly what study we are going on, then it's there is no point of being in the part of a research study.
So actually, if a person cannot read, they still can be in the clinical research, but you
Yes.
must have an
uh
impartial witness.
yes.
And so that's what I was looking for. And the informed
Yes.
consent form has to be read to them word for word. So
Yes.
if a person cannot
Clearly.
read, it has to be read to them in their native language, and you have to have an impartial witness.
Yes, and one person should be there, and we should tell him clearly, like step by step, what the things we are going in this clinical research study.
Okay, so this is a knowledge check. You all may not be familiar with this situation, but it will be presented at the next slide. So, what devastating clinical research incident that occurred from 1932 to 1972 prompt the FDA to create stricter informed consent regulations? Do either one of you know what clinical research trial that was?
My guess is that
Is that conducted
the
in the
cervix
pregnant?
cancer.
Hold on, one person, hold on. Sharon was speaking. Go ahead.
Is that the study with cervix cancer? They used one of the patient's cell and the patient's family found out
Okay.
20, 30 years later?
No, but that's a good guess. So you're talking about, I want to say her name was
Swati.
uh is it
Yeah, I forget.
Harriet? Is it Harriet? It starts with an S. I'm sorry, it starts with an
H.
H. I know you're talking about.
Yeah.
So she had cervical cancer. She died in her early 30s, and they noticed that her cells were still replicating in the that they pulled out for pathology testing. So they continue to use her. I cannot believe her name is blanking, but they
Mhm.
continue to use her cells in clinical research today, and her family has fought to get some type of form of compensation because there was was no consent to continue to use her tissue for research. But that's not it.
Okay.
So it happened here in Alabama. And but before I click to the next slide, what you think about that time frame?
Can I say it? I finished my GCP practice, I
Okay, so
guess.
you know it. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, yes. So in 1930, uh, Alzheimer's sulfonamide issues happened. I just got to know what things happen. So in 1938, we got that Fegdriel, that FDA Act came in, and during 1947 we got this consent of voluntary consent of the human participant is the absolute essential right.
And
Then
that
in
is that
1961 we got to know that thalidomide disaster, that
yes. But what
yeah.
happened in night? But what happened that's related to this topic? So what you're calling out are the FDA regulations that were strengthened or created due to clinical research. But I'm talking specifically for this one because it was related to strengthening the informed consent. And so so I so what you mentioned, those are accurate, but it's not the clinical trial that's related to this topic.
Oh.
So again, I what do you all think about that time frame?
Mm,
That's a long time to run a clinical trial, isn't it?
yeah.
That's 40 years.
Yeah, true.
Okay.
Oh, I don't
So
have any idea.
the answer is the Tuskegee experiment. So in the state
Oh,
of Alabama, we have a city that's called Tuskegee. And what happened started in 1932 that and was rarely common. The sexual transmitted disease syphilis has started making its way to be well known, I should say. And eventually they came up with the cure. Penicillin kills syphilis. But according to this article from the New York Times, um, for 40 years, the United States Public Health Services has conducted a study in which human beings with syphilis who were induced to serve as a guinea pig have gone without medical treatment for the disease. A few have died of its late effects, and even though an effective therapy was eventually discovered. So first of all, the individuals who were entered this study did not realize that a treatment was out and they should be getting it. It was a movie that came out that indicated that they were just told they had quote unquote bad blood. And so if you continue to read this article or other articles, there have been allegations, because I'm gonna just say allegations. I think it was proven, but I'm gonna say allegations that the health department made local doctors not treat those individuals who were in that clinical trial because they wanted to study the effects that syphilis had. And Tuskegee was the individuals who were in this clinical trial was African American men, primarily African American men. So although they could have just gave them a shot of penicillin, they let that syphilis take effect. They had a lot of complications. Not only did they have it, but because they were not aware of what was going, some of these men were married or in relationships, and then they passed the syphilis on to their sexual partners. So when this got made to known to the public in 1978, there was outrage and said that something needed to be done about it. So in 1981, the FDA and the Department of Health and Human Services revised the regulations for human subject protected based on the 1978 Belmont report. So they made it where the informed consent had to start involving the risk, and then if something came available like it that was approved to treat something that they had to make it known to the participants. So we know right now, if we are, I guess the most recent thing is out now is was the COVID outbreak, and so people who were participating in those clinical trials, if there was a safety issue or an alternative medication to treat COVID, those individuals that was approved, not other medicines that was in clinical trials, but once something had become approved by the FDA, it was the sponsor's responsibility to tell the CROs and the sites, and it was the PIs of the sites' responsibility to take that down to the participants. So this is what got strengthened because of that clinical trial. So can you imagine how many people that affected by doing a clinical trial for 40 years? That's a lot.
Maybe 500.
No, I think it was in the thousands.
Oh,
I think it was in the thousands. Because like I said, it didn't just affect the individuals who were in the trial. They passed that along to their family. And if I'm not mistaken, some offsprings were infected from the female having syphilis during childbirth. But viewers who review this content, do your own research. Make your own determination. This is why me personally, I wanted to be in clinical research to prevent things like this from happening. I want to make sure that adverse events are properly reported. I want sites to make sure they assess, to make sure they ask those questions at each visit for their participants. Have you experienced adverse events? Because like I mentioned in a previous video, clinical research is not just to say, hey, my drug work. That's, we hope that's the ultimate goal. But if we find out that it doesn't work, or we find out that it does work, but it just has too many adverse side effects, that's not something we want to put on the market. And so I'm happy that now the informed consents have to be more detailed. You can't hide anything. Well, you shouldn't hide anything from the participants, and everything that's going to go on within that clinical trial supposed to be documented in that informed consent. So, so unfortunately, regulations like this are created or strengthened based on something bad happening. So, what role do you all think that plays in getting participants to even participate in clinical research and getting them to sign the informed consent? And I'm gonna let Sawaka answer first.
could you please repeat the question again?
Yes. So when you have situations like this,
Okay.
or situations that you pointed out when you were talking about the situations that happened that caused the FDA to make various laws or regulations to strengthen the safety of participants. I think you had mentioned about three or four. So how how do you feel about things like that have to go wrong before a regulation is put into place? Like, what can we do to not have people die, not have children be born with birth defects, not have individuals continually to spread sexual transmitted disease because they weren't told what they have? What do you think we can do within clinical research to help prevent those things from happening right now here in 2026?
Mm,
And you mentioned something about your training, so that's one thing.
yeah. Yeah. Mm,
And Sharon has to go out early, so I'm gonna let her go ahead, Sharon, and you can
Yeah,
think about your response.
I think I agree with you. The AE report is very important. Even sometimes the symptom maybe you think it's nothing, but I still think everything we should make the report, because once we every side report the same AE, that would bring the attention to the decision maker before it hurt many people. So I really think AE report is very important.
Okay.
Mhm.
And what about you? Do you want to comment on that question?
Um,
I think you mentioned GCP training. So, how important do you feel GCP training is?
Medication safety and the patient safety is priority.
Yes, patient safety.
Yes, and moreover, correct clinical documentation.
Yes,
And
now that's important, that documentation, because if the patient reported, but it's not documented, what's the old saying? If it's not documented,
yes,
it's not
and
done.
accurate pretending the results and re-verifying like clearly what we are like. So today we have some research work going on, so we need to before starting it. So I from what I learned from my project is like I feel like we should always do the re-verifying. Even though we are sure, we need to re-verify whether we are doing right or not. So for me, re-verification is very important before we are doing anything. So I feel like
Especially when it comes
yeah,
to passing out that investigational
yes,
product.
yes, a re-verification is very important to me. So we can avoid these things.
Okay, so the next couple of slides, I'm just probably gonna talk about two concepts, and then we're gonna wrap it up on each page. But again, I pointed out that there is a list in our new GCP training that these concepts are required in the informed consent. And so, again, to let our viewers get an understanding of what those concepts are, we're going to just read off a couple of them on each page, and you'll be able to pause the video to read them for yourself. But first and foremost, the purpose of the trial. So that purpose is going to include the indication that the patient has to have, and then what the investigational product is and what the goal is. So, say for instance, you're running a diabetes trial. The goal is to lower A1C. An investigational product is called ABC 123. And so, right there in that purpose, you know that, hey, I am a diabetic. The goal is to lower my A1C so my diabetes can be controlled, and the goal is to use this investigational product to do so. And then, what is the expected of the participants? So, we know clinical trials is a commitment. Patients have to come in for various visits. They have to get vital signs done, sometimes diagnostic testing done, such as x-rays, CTs, echoes, MRIs, DEXA scans. And they have to do the regular visits, which usually consist of them getting their weight, their height, their vital signs, and then they are provided with the investigational product. And as they come in and continue in the study, they bring in their old bottle or their old kits for to assess accountability and compliance, and then they are given a new kit. So all of that has to be within the informed consent. Okay, on page 2, we're going to read off the reasonable expected benefits. So
I
again, if
have
we're
a
talking,
question.
go ahead.
Well, so earlier in the concept, it's basically like investigators brochure, like how the brochure will have like what's we are going on, like what component is going on. This research is given to the participant.
Yes, that has to be within a clinical trial. So
Okay.
whatever medication that they're studying, that has to be I said in the clinical trial, that has to be documented in an informed consent.
Okay, and does it involves that it also has a information related to the pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetics
So
related?
So that is in the investigational product, which the PI and anybody assessing AEs or should have training on. With
Oh,
that being said, the investigational product also should already have the known adverse events and anticipated adverse events that they have established based on. So if it's a phase 1, based on their preclinical trials, they should have that information in that investigation brochure. If that's a phase 2, so the information from preclinical trials and phase 1 study, on and on and on. So, typically the phase right before the drug is approved is the phase 3 trials. And so the known adverse events um, from phase 2, 1, and preclinical should be within that informed consent form.
yeah,
So, so we also the reasonable expected benefits when there is no intended clinical benefits to the participant, the participant should be made aware. So typically, observational studies don't have a intended clinical benefit, but the information that is gathered may help improve standard of care. So typically, your observational clinical trials are the ones that don't have an intended benefit. If you are on a diet study or exercise study or a device study or an investigational product study, then the intended benefit is hoping that those concepts or medications or devices improve your indication. Oh, a big thing about clinical trials is the compensation. So one of the outside of patient safety, one of the things that the IRB reviews um, in an informed consent form in the compensation, because we want to make sure we're not coercing the patient to participate based on this big obscene financial reimbursement they will be getting. We got to make sure that the time commitment, the e-diary commitment, or taking the medication commitment they have in this clinical trial is being compensated within reason. But we do know that a lot of individuals will not participate unless they are compensated. Okay, so the concepts L through Q. I'm gonna read off I'm gonna read off this last one in this corner. The participant or the participant's legal acceptable representative will be informed in a timely manner if information becomes available that may be relevant to the participant's willingness to continue in the trial participation. So I'm happy I picked that one because that's one of the things that I had mentioned earlier. So if there is, so for instance, a person is in a chemotherapy trial for breast cancer. And there has been a recently approved treatment, whether or not that's chemotherapy, immunotherapy, whatever that therapy is, but it's been recently approved. That information has to be told to that participant, but to make sure that they want to continue, because the informed consent process is a continual thing. So even though they might sign the paper 3 months ago, them coming back to each visit, to doing what is necessary for the clinical trial, they are continuing their informed consent. But once they have gotten this knowledge and say, hey, instead of participating in this trial for 2 more years, I'd rather go seek out that, see if my doctor can prescribe me that new approved treatment, that's within their right. So we're not saying that informed consent um, is going to list a recently approved medication. We're saying that the concept of being notified has to be listed in that clinical trial, in that clinical informed consent. I don't know why I keep saying clinical trial instead of informed consent. And then these are our last concepts. Let's see. We're going to read the expected duration of the participants' trial participation. So, if it is a 6 month trial, 9 month trial, 2 year trial, 5 year trial, however long per protocol the trial should be, that needs to be in the informed consent. And typically, it is on the first couple of pages, along with the approximate number of participants involved in the trial, because usually this information is right around the time that the purpose is mentioned. So although this concept is towards the end of this list that is associated with GCP, this information is typically listed in the first couple of pages of an informed consent. And that just lets the lets the participant know, they what type of trial, because based on the number of participants, it kind of gives you an understanding of what phase you might be in. We know that the preclinical is animal. We know phase 1 is healthy, usually healthy volunteers, and it's a very small number. And then as the trials increase, the numbers increase. Okay, so I'm gonna briefly talk about informed consent deviations. We still notice deviations today as a CRA. We go onto sites and we look at the informed consent process, and we still see deviations. And those deviations are usually, maybe there was a required parent for a minor, and the parent did not sign, just the participant signed, the minor child signed, and assessments were done. Sometimes you have somebody sign in all places that they needed to sign, and they signed it correctly, but then when you look at the rest of their documentation, you notice that their blood pressure was taken before the informed consent was gathered. That's a deviation. If the person who is signing the informed consent does not sign the informed consent, only the patient signed, then those are examples of deviations. If there is a new protocol amendment that has a new informed consent, especially if it was for safety reasons, and that patient came back for a subsequent visit, and they were not informed of that new safety information, they did not reconsent, and those assessments were done on that day, that's a protocol deviation. And these are deviations that must be reported to the institutional review board. If you are at an academia facility, sometimes you have your own IRB, 9 times out of 10. So depending on what their requirements are, you might have to report it locally in addition to the central IRB.
So it
Now,
means like once we collect all date like the consent forms, then we need to make sure they put the signature or they were like, and after that also we need to ask personally, like to the each participant, like did they read out all the instructions or not? Are they, are you okay to be in the part of research? Is that
so
same right?
So there's a document that the sites have to create. It's called documenting the informed consent process. And there's
Yeah.
a list of questions that has to be on that documentation. And they check yes or no or NA, and then somebody signs that as well. So that is also a deviation. So if a site personnel has consented someone, but they did not document the process, so we don't know if that patient received a signed copy. We don't know if the patient was given enough time to read the consent form. We don't know if the patient was not coerced. That is a deviation because the process was not documented. So that is again based on the IRB's criteria. That might be another situation that has to be reported. Now, things that typically do not have to be reported, and they just count them as administrative if the patient didn't follow the date format. So, say for instance, the date format that's indicated on the consent says due date, month, and year, but they did month, date, year. that's still them dating. So it's
Yes.
not a deviation, it's just administrative error. So the patient does not have to be reconsented to fix that error. They can just, the next time they come, they can just draw a line through that date format, correct it, and initial and date.
Yeah,
And
and
that
the
should be done.
researcher team should be also use an like latest version of IRB approved consent form.
Exactly. They must use the latest approved, and they
Yes.
must use the one that's relevant to them. So again, if you have a study that's doing both minors and adults, you got to make sure that the minor has the consent form and the adult has the the parent or legal guardian has the adult consent form. Another thing that gets a lot of sites in trouble is sometimes consent forms have a separate section that allows the participant to decide whether or not their biomarkers can be used for other exploratory research, or their genetic materials can be used for exploratory research. So basically, an extra couple of tubes of blood being drawn in addition to the testing that's related to the study. And if that patient did not sign off on those boxes, or and sometimes that can be, it can be his own different consent form just specifically for biosamples. If they didn't sign off for that, then those samples should not be collected. And those samples, if collected, cannot be analyzed, and they should be pers-
Considered.
they should be destroyed. But it's always best to talk to a representative of the sponsor for first, or your CRO first. But the lab should destroy them. And that's the same with if it and that also applies to blood being drawn that's a part of the study. If it is determined that the informed consent was signed after the blood was drawn for a regular visit, then that blood associated with that visit should not be analyzed. Even if it was the last day the patient can come in, that can determine whether or not they can be randomized. If that happens, they should not be randomized. That lab should not be processed. Now they can always reschedule, but if it's outside the screening window, that patient still shouldn't be randomized to the study. So those are some common informed consent deviations. That's definitely not all possible deviations, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what informed consent deviations you might come across, and if you're a study coordinator or a site staff, deviations you want to try to prevent. Okay, so do you have any questions before we conclude? Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do have always one question.
Okay.
So, what if so if they find out some, so anyhow clearly we'll say like these are the risks and the side effects you'll get it during this study. But what if we discover the new type of uh, like the risk comes suddenly in a patient? So what we can do at that time?
So are you saying, so make sure I understood you correctly. So a person participating in a clinical trial, and we notice that person is having a lot of adverse events.
Yes.
Okay, so first and foremost, the principal investigator or a delegated medically qualified person has to determine if that adverse event is associated with the IP. And they will look at the patient's information, their labs that were drawn at that visit, how soon after the administration of the medication that these adverse events occur, if they are worsening over time. All of that is taken into account the relationship with the IP. If it's determined that the adverse event is called what, unanticipated, so something happened that was not anticipated, it's not in that investigator brochure, we have to report it to the sponsor. And the way the site does that, they document it in their chart, and they document in what's called the EDC system, or the electronic data capture system. If it meets the serious criteria, then that means it has to be reported within 24 hours, not only to the sponsor, but there is a time frame that is going to have to be reported to the IRB, and each IRB is different, but it's typically 7 to 14 days, or 5 to 10 5 to 10 business days when that has to be reported. So the sponsor is collecting this information from all over, and they analyze whether or not it has been seen at other sites, or again, if it's a serious adverse event and it's not anticipated, it gets routed up to what we call a SUSARS. So it's a serious unanticipated reportable event. And so all sites that's participating in that clinical trial gets a copy of that. Typically, their initial report is not the final report, because they're gathering data from that participant's labs, what they have reported in the past, how soon those reactions happen, and if it's determined to be related to the IP. From my understanding, it becomes one of the known side effects um, of that investigational product. So even if it becomes approved, it has to be listed as one of the side effects. Now, the PI always has the medical discretion to withdraw a patient from a study. So they can either halt the study medication, they can reduce the study medication, which typically they have to get approval to reduce, and because that's a protocol deviation. But for patient safety, they can stop it. It's still a deviation, but the root cause analysis will always be patient safety comes first. And then they discuss it with the medical monitoring team. So the doctors that have been selected as experts to the drug and experts to the indication, they will have a conversation with that person or persons to determine if the patient should be withdrawn from the study, if the medication should be reduced, if the medication just should be temporarily stopped. So sometimes protocols already have those concepts built in. Yet if the patient's liver functions is this, then stop medicine. If the patient's liver functions is this, reduce dosages. So sometimes, based on what they know about adverse events, those criteria are already built into the protocol. But when they're not built into the protocol, again, that principal investigator should have a discussion with the sponsor, have a discussion with the medical monitoring team to decide what is the best route to take for that participant.
Yeah, thank you for your response. I really appreciate for answering my question.
Oh, no problem.
And I do also have one question always, like so for example, we are doing one research study,
Okay.
and it's not like we usually conduct that one study in one particular site. Will conduct in all, like, different types of hospitals. So at that time, how the research team will, like, maintain the consistency in the informed consent process. So in the different, like, now they are conducting the study in different areas, like different study sites. So
So
how the research team will get the consistency, like making sure they are receiving the informed consent process, like, properly in all the location. If we get from one location straight away, we are okay, we are getting from this location, we have this documentation. But
great.
we will get the documents in different locations, like for example for like 10 locations. So at that time, like, how they're gonna maintain the
So how
documents.
so what helps to maintain it is first and foremost the legal regulation in that area. So that's number one. So whatever the legal regulation in that area, far as informed consents, all of those sites, even though they're conducting it in different sites, they should follow that. Then the second thing that kicks in, and the whole reason why this was created, the good clinical practice, the standard or the guidelines that were presented in clinical research, hoping that everyone follows. Now, with that being said, some people might document on paper. Like again, they create that checklist. Somebody checks yes or no, then they sign and date. Some people might have that checklist built into a computerized system. The individuals checks yes or no, and then the system supposed to have a ability to stamp time and date all of those entries, and then the person should be able to sign. So that is how they stand, quote unquote, standardized. So even though a clinical trial is functioning in different locations, everybody should have the same IRB approved consent form. If it's in the same country. Now, if they're in a different country, they're going to have their same informed consent form, but the concept is the same. They have to make sure that the informed consent form is in the participant's language. It has to include all these concepts that we discussed. As it relates to clinical research informed consent, and it has to be documented. So even though we have multi sites, we might have multi countries, the concept of the informed consent documentation is the same. And to ensure that is being done correctly. This is why you have people who are in my role, the monitor. So some sites have their own quality team to make sure that the document process is consistent across the board. So that's how we make sure and that's why most protocols are set up for monitors to go to the sites within the first 10 days of the first randomized patient. And some even say the first few days of the first screening patient, whatever the strict criteria is, because the goal is to minimize deviations across sites and within that site. So we don't want one site doing it this way and another site doing it that way. That's also why we have the protocol. Everybody should be following the same protocol. So that's why. So that's what we do to kind of minimize things being different.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
So these are my other social media. Oh no, I'm sorry. These are the references. So these are the places where I
Uh,
got the information. So this is
the-
my reference page. Um,
yeah.
and these are my other social media platforms. And so if you want to contact me, if anyone want to contact me for individualized clinical research training, they can email me at drhoodresearch@gmail.com, and we can get you scheduled, or they can DM me on one of these platforms as well. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. So I want to thank my guests for participating. One had to leave early because she had another engagement. But I want to thank you for being able to participate for the duration of the open discussion. I have the goal is to have these every other week. And by the time the new Saturday comes, the editing from the previous content is uploaded to my YouTube page. So you can go there and look at previous open discussions. It's only going to be about three, two that I've done recently, and I think I did one or two last year. And one of those open discussions only only has me talking about a topic, but I feel like now that I have more participation on my LinkedIn network, now that I have more time to dedicate to this, then I in the future will get more participation.
And thank you for your discussion. It was very helpful, and I learned a lot. about the informed consent process. Thank you so much. And
You're
it's very
welcome.
informative.
And I want you to have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Bye bye.